Welcome back to Triple Threat Podcast. My name is William Zell, and we're finishing up the AFC today with the AFC East. And this has to be by far the worst division, right, Ishan, in the AFC?
Yeah, I would say that.
But to give it credit, it has improved. And so, what's your outlook on this? I think I have two playoff teams in this division.
Yeah, you could definitely make the argument for two, the Miami Dolphins and the New York Jets. But in all seriousness, it's pretty imbalanced. You have the Bills and obviously the Patriots competing for playoff spots. They both made it last year, and they are both obviously very good teams. Hopefully, if Josh Allen can kind of get his act together with throwing a ball that's within 10 yards of Stephon Diggs, the Bills' offense will be very fun to watch. I love Devin Singletary. They have, John Brown. They got Stephon Diggs. And they have a pretty solid line, so that's definitely going to be fun to watch. And then, of course, their defense is pretty good.
What they should do is have a trail route. So they have one receiver run a route, another one run a route 10 yards behind it. So no matter what happens, it's going to be a completion.
And then, obviously, New England, they got Cam Newton. Bill Belichick has been giving him some very high praise recently.
He doesn't do that often. No, he does not praise anyone.
Yeah, if you're getting praise from Bill Belichick, that's something.
He's either trying to get you a coaching job, or you're actually really special.
And then their defense, obviously, is one of the best in the league. As always, you have the reigning defensive player of the year. But what worries me on this defense is the 6 players that were either starting or kind of within the rotation opting out for COVID. That does worry me, but I know Belichick does have depth, and he can definitely kind of maneuver his way through this. If there's one coach I would trust in a crisis like this, it'd be Bill Belichick. And he still has Stephon Gilmore. I believe he has J.C. Jackson and the McCourty twins, but I could be wrong about that. And with the Jets and the Dolphins, they're both young teams, kind of in their rebuilding phase. We'll have to see what Sam Darnold does, and I'm excited to see Tua.
So let's start with the Jets, because that's who I have finishing 4th in the division at 5-11. This is not going to be the year. They had 3 players opt out: Josh Doxson at receiver, Leo Colomagnotti at offensive line, and then C.J. Mosley's the real hard one at linebacker. So they paid a lot of money, and he's only played like 1 preseason game. So let's start with them because we have them in last. So they traded away Jamal Adams this offseason, and their roster – it's a roster. We can start with that. So their offensive line is very new. So if you look at their free agency moves, they made a couple on the offensive line. They brought in George Fant from Seattle. They brought in Greg Van Roten from the Panthers.
Makai.
They brought Mekhi Becton in the draft. They brought in Josh Andrews at center from the Colts. They brought in Connor McGovern at center from the Broncos. They brought in Alex Lynn from the Vikings. But bringing in a bunch of guys is going to make an offensive line a unit. It's just going to make it marginally better, but a lot more expensive. Yeah. They also brought in some other additions, like they brought in Pierre Desir, who's not very good on an island, and they tried to do that way too many times at the Colts last year. They brought in Rashard Perriman. I think it's a pretty decent signing. They didn't lose too much. They lost Robbie Anderson, who was their best receiver. But if you look at this roster, its offensive line is still porous. I don't expect that to change much. If anything, it's going to be really rough the first couple of weeks because I don't think they're going to have much time to gel. Beckham's going to be very, very rough. Fant is a 6 offensive lineman at best. Their receiving core is a bit suspect. They have Denzel Mims, who's injured. I think Perriman is injured as well, so Crowder's the only one healthy for week 1. They have Chris Hogan as well. Le'Veon Bell and is currently only doing marginally better than Frank Gore and Cam. Oh, they brought in Frank Gore, obviously. So apparently they're doing a 60-40 split at running back, which kind of concerns me. Their linebackers are very, very suspect. Blake Cashman, who is a 5th rounder of last year in the draft from Minnesota. And then they have Neville Hewitt. So those linebackers scare me a lot. And then I don't think they have their coverage is decent. Brian Poole's a good slot, but their outside corners are pretty dreadful. Blushuan Austin is their number one outside corner with Pierre Desir. Really, really awful. And then their draft was – let's get to their draft because it's their first year in charge of – he used to work for the Eagles. Who's their GM? It's Joe Douglas from the Eagles. So this is his first draft in charge, and he did a pretty decent job as the first draft. I'm not the biggest Mekhi Becton fan, but I can see the appeal, and his impact in the run game will be immediately felt. Denzel Mims, great. I think he's the third best receiver in this draft. I really like him. Ashtyn Davis, I can let you talk about him for hours because I know how much you love Ashtyn Davis. You want to talk about Ashtyn Davis for a second?
Former track star. I think he came to Cal on a track scholarship, just super athletic. And then he ended up becoming the star safety on the Cal football team. And his passer rating allowed for this year was lower than the passer rating that quarterbacks get for just like throwing away the ball out of bounds. So he's pretty good at what he does. And I think we had him as a first or early second round talent. And they got him in the third, I believe, right?
Yeah, pick 68. So
yeah. So definitely a steal there.
I remember you were much higher on him than I was. And then I went to go watch Justin Herbert film. And I saw this one guy. And I was like, who's this really good Cal safety? Is that Ashtyn Davis? I'm like, oh my God, he's amazing. They picked up Jabari Zuniga, pick 79. I wasn't the biggest Jabari Zuniga fan or, for that matter, Jonathan Greenard. I thought the Florida guys were kind of underwhelming. Michael Pirine should be a decent option. James Morgan is an interesting backup quarterback, but the big A+ they got, Bryce Hall. I thought he was a top corner. In my big board, I think I was very high on him. I had him as a second round grade. I thought he was my cornerback 5 overall behind Chris Fulton. Getting him in where they got him incredible value. So really great stuff.
Like the 5th or 6th round.
Yeah, they got him. Let me see where they got him. They got him at hold on one second. They got him at pick 158. That's incredible.
Yeah, he was a top corner just in college football too, because he was doing very well last year. Yeah, so I think that the Jets definitely have a good future. Hopefully Sam Darnold does not see any ghosts, but I think that we'll have to see how they go because their offense is kind of in a weird position right now. Same with their defense. But I'm kind of rooting for Quinn Williams.
So let's talk about that defense because
status.
It was not great last year, but surprisingly, if you look at their defensive DVOA from last season, they were 11th with that's defensive average value above defensive adjusted value over replacement. It's basically how much better that they did than the average, which was 4% better. So they weren't the worst group in the world last year, but you have to imagine that's going to go down this year. They lost a lot of key personnel. Their linebacking core is thin. Their corners, I think probably Bryce Hall will be the number one corner by November. And then this offensive line is still not great. Sam Darnold showed promise of being a great quarterback, but this roster is nothing special. But a roster that did improve, however, is who I have going 6-10, the Miami Dolphins. And this could be a top 10 defensive group this year.
Yeah. So their over-under is actually 6, and you have them right at 6 wins. So it's pretty well placed. But they added Byron Jones, obviously. That was their big addition. Sorry. You have Brian Flores, who, came from New England, great defensive coach. And then who did they get in the draft?
We can start with their draft, I guess. So in the first round, they drafted Tua Tagovailoa first overall, and later in they had 3 picks in the first. They had Austin Jackson at 18, which was huge reach in my opinion. Does not have the production in college. Great guy, just not a great production. They drafted Noah Igbenogany at pick
That's who
30.
it was.
We liked that pick a lot. Robert Hunt at pick 39 was a brilliant pick. Raekwon Davis was a decent pick. Brandon Jones, smart guy, textbook nerd. He's going to study the playbook like a madman. So I wouldn't be surprised if he gets in this team because Brian Flores is going to know that his intelligence on defense is going to be great. Travis Gibson, and then Curtis Weaver.
Oh my God.
We were really high on their draft. We liked every pick besides Austin Jackson. Austin Jackson was really not a very good pick at all. So,
especially given who was available at the time.
yeah, they could have had Josh Jones.
Oh yeah.
That's basically our go-to. Any second-round pick, they could have had Josh Jones. So, let's go to their offseason. They brought in Emmanuel Ogbah, Eric Flowers. They're going to play at guard. He had a decent season at guard last year. Jordan Howard, Camu Grugier-Hill, Kyle Van Noy, Shaq Lawson. Matt Breida was a trade. They brought in a very interesting pickup, Lynn Bowden Jr. for a fourth-round pick, which I thought was a pretty sneaky deal. So I think that this offense, this is really the concern about this team because I think their defense is going to be fine. Because if you look at this unit, they're going to be starting Austin Jackson at left tackle, which is really concerning to me. They have Eric Flowers at guard. Is that Nate Davis at right tackle? I believe it is. You have some very interesting guys throughout this whole unit. Just not great. You look at the receiving option, Preston Williams. People really like him, but I'm not really the one believing the hype. I've never been on the Devontae Parker hype train. He did play. I meant before all that, but he played really well last year. Great contested guy, but I think he's still got some developing to do. I think Lynn Bowden could do a very decent option at receiver as a slot kind of guy.
Athletic guy.
I just don't see a lot of offense being generated by this group. Mike Gesicki should be really good in the red zone, but Tua first year, Fitzmagic, I should say. It'll be interesting to see how this group gels together, but I don't see it really happening. You look at their defensive DVOA last year. Miami ranked pretty far down. Oh, they were dead last. Their offensive metrics, they were 28th. So they won six, seven games last year with 30.
No, they won 5.
5 games with the 32nd defense. I mean, you'd be pretty silly to have them going 5 wins or below. So if I were anyone, I would probably go with the over on the Dolphins, but the offense is really going to be the concern with this team.
Yeah, and Fitzpatrick I'm really happy for him the way he's kind of said that Tua is the future of this team at quarterback, and he's going to be a good mentor to Tua. So there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve for Tua, and I think Fitzpatrick is going to do his best to kind of account for that. So I think this team is a really good bet in the future, but they're just going to go through some growing pains this year until they can finally gel together. COVID definitely messed up a lot for these young teams trying to gel together, especially ones with a lot of draft picks, a lot of high draft picks, and I think Miami was hit pretty hard.
So they have the Title 11 TV schedule, so that should be a helpful addition for them. And I think that's going to be. They're going to have a decent season this year. I think they're going to play people hard. I love B-Flow as a coach. I was a big B-Flow fan when I signed him. I'm a big B-Flow fan now. B-Flow is the future. I really like Brian Flores. And then we move on to the second place team, the wild card team from this division. They were tied on record in my prediction. They were tied on division record in my prediction. The only reason why this team wasn't the division champion was because of conference record. And it's going to be, as much as I wanted to put them as number 1, the New England Patriots at 9-7.
I have them at second too.
So let's start with their opt-outs because that's going to be the big issue. Brandon Bolden, Marcus Cannon, Patrick Chung, Donta Hightower, Matt Lacoste, Marquise Lee, Najee Turan, and Danny Vitale. A lot of opt-outs. 3-4 big names.
Plus Kyle Van Noy leaving.
And Kyle Van Noy leaving in free agency. But let's look at this roster because I think that this roster is probably going to still it's improved on offense. It's probably taking a little bit step back on defense. But Bill Belichick, I really trust him to get the best out of these players. I think they're probably going to be starting Josh Boucher on the defensive end. Chase Winovich, I really want to be looking towards him as a guy to improve. Lawrence Guy's always been a really good player at tackle. I want to see a little more out of Butler this year. Bentley was a great Mike linebacker. I think he's really going to be a decent placer for Hightower, especially when Hightower's injured, but at least stepped in adequately. Uchi's playing a start at the Sam. Their secondary is still incredible. J.C. Jackson, Stephon Gilmore. You look at them when they go into a nickel personnel, they're going to be bringing in Jonathan Jones. So this secondary is going to be incredible. But McCourty, Phillips, I think that their secondary is going to be just fine. And that's the same model that Miami was trying to emulate with the bringing in more secondary options because they drafted and brought in a bunch of guys in free agency. This offensive line's healthy. Andrews, their center, is going to be a huge, huge addition. Isaiah Wynn, if he's healthy, is going to be a big help. Then you've got Toomey and Mason at guard. Only concern is going to be your right tackle after you lost Trent Brown the other summer, 2 years, or last offseason. You bring in Cam Newton at quarterback. I think that's going to be a great addition.
He's been doing well.
I mean, we talked about it. He's getting praise from potentially Emmy-nominated Bill Belichick for that Subway commercial. But you worry a little bit about tight ends. They're going to have Devin Asiasi and Dalton Keene battling out their two rookies, but we'll get into the draft in a second. So this roster, their offensive line still looks great. I trust their secondary. This is probably one of the top 3 secondaries in the league, top 2. Their defensive line, Belichick will find a way to manufacture production. I'm not concerned about this defense at all. They won't be that record-breaking team that they were at the beginning of the year or throughout last year, but they'll still be a top 5, top 10 group.
Yeah, definitely.
And then we look at their draft. Their draft is quite interesting, to say the least. So they didn't have a first-round pick, but they did draft. Okay, they traded back, obviously. So they traded back, and they got Kyle Duggar with the Chargers. Ooh, Kyle Duggar is going to be very fun to watch. I hope they play about linebacker this year because their secondary is probably fine. And then he'd be incredible at linebacker. He's 24, athletic monster out of Lenore-Ryan. I think he's going to be incredible in the system. I really do. Josh Uche of Michigan, another athletic freak. Belichick is getting some incredible athletes. Anthony Jennings out of Alabama is a great linebacker. He probably could start at the Sam or Will spots already. And then they will also, as I said, Devin CC and Dalton Keene. And they're really under the radar signing draft pick Michael Keene, offensive lineman out of Michigan. So some interesting pieces so far, but this roster is pretty much the same, but plug in Cam Newton. So 9-17 is pretty fair to me for a team that went 12-4 last year.
Yeah, and given the fact that they have arguably the greatest coach of all time, he can definitely will them to a playoff spot one more time. It's not like since Brady left, the whole dynasty collapsed. It's not like a San Antonio Spurs type thing. They're still a very strong team, and I think that they can definitely compete for a playoff spot.
And we've heard really good stuff about Demir Bird and Slater in practice so far. Seeing those guys with Cam Newton should be fine. Cam Newton's worked with receivers on the caliber Edelman and N'Keal Harry because he's never had much help in Carolina. And then they lost a lot of guys. Well, not a lot of guys. Van Noy, Jamie Collins, Landon Roberts, Danny Shelton. So their defensive line really got hit, or the front seven did. So I think this team should be fine. Look at their strength of schedule, and it's tied 20th, so
middle of the pack,
not bad. You look at their metrics on offense last year, and it wasn't the greatest 11th, but that's still like if you saw them last year, they did not look like the 11th best offense in the league. So you really want to look at that and be like, where will they like 11th this year? And then one X factor is Bill Belichick and McDaniels have had a whole section of their playbook for Cam Newton designed plays. They just didn't have someone to run it. It's not like they just had to go off this offseason and make a bunch of plays. They already had them in their playbook. Their playbook is so extensive. They probably can play for any type of quarterback they have. I mean, that's how prepared this team is, and that's why I think that with Cam Newton, I didn't like him in Carolina because he was a division rival. I can cheer for Cam Newton now. I did not like him in Carolina. I think both of us did. Saints fan,
No.
Falcons fan.
No,
We didn't like him. So now he's on the Patriots, not Tom Brady. The Patriots are kind of a likable team.
Yeah. I hate the Bucks now.
We both hate the Bucks.
All my homies hate the Buccaneers.
I've always hated the Bucks. So
yeah.
I think they'll have a really solid season, and whatever their over under is, I would definitely hammer that.
It's 9.
I would still hammer it. I think 9's about where they should finish. You'll get a push no matter what. I think there's no way. People talk about them tanking. There's no way Belichick should have let a roster tank.
No, Belichick wouldn't do that. It's one quarterback who is 40 years old that's getting replaced by a dude that's receiving high praise. So it's definitely not the end of the world for Patriots fans. Are they still contenders? Are they still the same 11-12-1 team that we saw from a couple years ago? No, they're not. There are much better teams in the AFC, Kansas City, Baltimore, but they'll still give a lot of good teams a run for their money. They have the coaching, they have the defense, and they have offensive potential. So the world is not over for Patriots fans. It makes me sad.
They kind of deserve a year of misery, but they'll get that when Belichick leaves or unless Steve Belichick takes over, the Belichick name keeps the New England. But that means our division champion for the 2020 season, for the first time in a decade.
It's been more than a decade.
Well, I mean, not for the Bills, but the first time in a decade that it's not the Patriots.
Oh, yeah.
First time in many decades.
Yeah, because it was Miami that won it last.
Yeah. No, the Jets. The Jets wasn't it?
No, it was so Brady got hurt, and then it was Miami.
I thought it was Sanchez teams that went to the AFC Championship back-to-back years.
No, they were wild card teams. New England won like 14-2 those years. They're insane. But yeah, the Buffalo Bills, they've obviously grown and improved. There's Josh Allen. There is a very solid receiver core. There's Devin Singletary, who I like. I think you like as well. Solid line, and then their defense. That's definitely a big part of it. They have the second best cornerback in the NFL, in my opinion, Trey White. They have Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer. They have great defensive line front seven. What's the deal with Ed Oliver, though?
He got his charges dropped.
Oh, he did?
Yep.
That's great to hear.
I think he was misconvicted or something, but I think he's all clear.
Yeah. Ed Oliver was one of our favorite players in the draft. I wanted the Falcons to draft him. He still has, through-the-roof potential, and I think this could be a big year for him. And I'm just excited to watch this team because it's like Buffalo. I'm rooting for them. I'm rooting for the crown
Mafia.
in the NFC East. It's been a minute.
So their secondary looks great, as you said. Poyer, Hyde, White. They brought in – so we'll just go to their offseason review because it's a little bit of an interesting offseason for them, for Sean McDermott's men. They brought in Josh Norman from the Panthers. Who else did they bring in? They brought in A.J. Klein from the Saints. It was a pretty quiet offseason for them. They brought in Stephon Diggs from the Vikings. So not the most awe-inspiring offseason, but what really concerns me about this roster is their offensive line because it is the definition of mediocrity. You got Deion Dawkins at the left, Quinn Spain, Mitch Morse. You have Brian Winters and Cody Ford. It's a pretty average offensive line. And with Josh Allen, you want him to have a clean pocket because he's not the most accurate quarterback that we've seen.
Really?
Oh, well, really. Josh Allen's not the most accurate quarterback. But it was an interesting year for them. Their linebacking core, Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano. Klein, I don't know about A.J. Klein. I loved bashing him at the Saints because he was an easy player to pick on, but he'll be fine as it's the third option there. And then their draft is a little bit interesting. They didn't have their first round pick, obviously, for trading for Stephon Diggs, but they did manage to get A.J. Epinesa, who probably will be second string third-string defensive tackle.
Yeah, and he's a very good player, or at least like technique fundamentally. Didn't really have the athleticism. So.
And then they got Zach Moss, who the PFF crew loved. He was their number one running back for a while.
And he's been getting some high praise in training camp too.
I think he'll be the number one running back on this team.
They're saying that him and Singletary might actually split carries for the first couple weeks.
And they should. They've got two great running backs.
Based on that production, they'll kind of see who's the number one going forward. But Josh Allen has weapons, and he has a very good receiver in Diggs. They might have given up a little bit too much for him, in my opinion.
Probably.
But you got to give your young quarterback his receiver at some point, or else you don't really know if you're putting the blame on his surrounding pieces or the quarterback himself. This is just a big prove-it year for Josh Allen, and if it goes well, I think this team could definitely hit double-digit wins.
I think double digits is a little bit ambitious for them. I think 9-7 is probably about right for them. I mean, that's why I predicted it. They got two more good receivers in the draft, Gabriel Davis out of UCF, and then I really like Isaiah Hodgins out of Oregon State. Dane Jackson at Pittsburgh is a decent option in the 7th round, but it's a 7th rounder. Jake Fromm, we're not going to go into – we've already talked about his offseason. But I don't think he's a good player. I don't think he's a good person, so I wouldn't have him on the roster.
Yeah, go Jackets.
Go Jackets. So we have them as our 4th seed in the AFC. I wouldn't be confident about putting them as my number 1 seed or as my division winners because the Patriots, obviously, they could take the division easily. Miami is an outside shot. The Jets have no chance. I'm just going to say that now. The Jets have no chance. And now they're going to win the division, and I'm going to look like an idiot. So I think we'll all look like idiots if the Jets win the division. There's not going to be too many people pounding that drum. But that's going to do it for us. If you want to see how these teams do in the playoffs, we're going to drop a playoff prediction before week 1, maybe. I hope before week 1.
Yeah.
And then that'll do it for the AFC. If you haven't watched other videos, they're going to be linked somewhere over here or in the description. Or just check our channel out. So they'll be listed there. We'll be working on the NFC and we'll get those uploaded. So check out the rest of our predictions. And until then, take care.
Sick.